The sun was slowly setting over the wide-open land, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. Out in the distance, a rancher stood tall beside his cattle, his broad figure moving calmly as he guided them back toward the barn. To most people who knew him, he was a man who spoke little but whose actions always spoke louder than words. He lived a simple life, working hard from sunrise to sunset, and he found peace in the quiet rhythm of the land. That evening was supposed to be like any other. He was thinking about finishing his chores, feeding the horses, and sitting down for a warm meal after a long day. The sound of the cows moving in the field, the rustle of dry grass, and the cool breeze made everything feel steady and familiar. Nothing about the moment gave any sign that something unexpected was about to happen. But suddenly, from far across the ranch fence, he heard a faint sound. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the whistle of the wind. It was softer, shakier, and filled with something that made his heart pause. He straightened his back and turned his head, trying to listen closely. At first, it was unclear. Then, as the sound grew closer, he realized it was the voice of a child. The rancher's eyes narrowed as he spotted a small figure moving through the tall grass. The little one stumbled, wiping tears from his face, his tiny feet carrying him as fast as they could. His clothes were dusty, his face red from crying, and his voice broke with fear as he called out, "Help! Please help!" The rancher didn't move at first. He was shocked. Children rarely came this far out into the ranch alone, and for one to arrive crying like that meant something was terribly wrong. He dropped the rope he was holding and rushed forward, his long strides closing the distance quickly. When the child finally reached him, he clung to the rancher's leg, shaking all over. Between sobs, he managed to cry out words that made the rancher's blood run cold. "Mama is dying." They hurt her bad. The rancher froze. For a moment, the world around him went silent. The cattle, the wind, the birds, he didn't hear any of it. His heart pounded as he looked down into the frightened eyes of the little one. Those eyes weren't just filled with tears. They carried a fear so deep it pierced through the rancher's chest. He knew in that instant that this was not a moment to wait or ask too many questions. Something urgent was happening, and this child was depending on him. Without a second thought, he knelt down to the boy's level, placing his large, steady hands on his shoulders. His voice, though low, was calm and firm. "It's all right. I'm here. Show me where." The child nodded quickly, his sobs still shaking his small body. He pointed back toward the open fields, his finger trembling in the direction he had come from. The rancher stood tall, his shadow stretching across the grass as the evening sun dipped lower. He didn't waste another second. He reached for his horse, mounted in one swift move, and pulled the child up to sit safely in front of him. The horse, sensing the urgency, moved swiftly under the rancher's command. Dust rose from the ground as they galloped across the field, the child clutching tightly to the man's arms. The rancher's face was firm, his jaw clenched. He didn't know exactly what he would find ahead, but one thing was clear: he would not turn away. The ride felt longer than it was. Every second seemed heavy as the boy pointed the way, whispering in between sobs, "Mama. Mama needs help." The rancher urged the horse forward, his mind racing, but his focus sharp. He had lived through storms, droughts, and dangers that tested his strength, but nothing felt as urgent as the cry of this child. When they finally reached the clearing, the rancher slowed the horse and scanned the area. His eyes landed on a woman lying in the grass. She was breathing, but weak. The child immediately slid off the horse and ran to her side, clutching her hand. The rancher followed quickly, kneeling down beside them. The woman's eyes fluttered open, faint but alive. Relief washed over the child as he whispered, "Mama, I found help." The rancher's chest tightened at the sight. She was in pain, but still fighting. He spoke gently, assuring her, "You're safe now. We'll take care of you." In that moment, he knew he had been in the right place at the right time. A simple evening on the ranch had turned into a call for courage, and he had answered without hesitation. What he didn't know was that the events of this night would soon spread far beyond the ranch, touching the hearts of people he had never met, and reminding the world of the power of human kindness. The rancher lifted his head slowly, scanning the wide open space around them. The woman lay on the ground, breathing faintly, while the child clung tightly to her hand. The golden light of the evening was fading, and a slight chill swept across the clearing. The rancher's instincts told him one thing clearly: they couldn't stay here. He reached into the small pouch strapped to his saddle, pulling out a flask of water. Gently, he offered it to the woman, holding it steady as she sipped a little. Her lips trembled, and her eyes, though tired, filled with gratitude. She whispered something soft to hear, but the rancher nodded as if he understood. Sometimes words weren't needed. A look could speak louder. The child kept glancing between his mother and the rancher, as if afraid she would slip away if he stopped watching her for even a second. The rancher noticed this, and in a calm, steady tone, he said, "She's with us. She's strong. You did the right thing by finding me." For a moment, the child's breathing slowed. His shoulders loosened just a little, though his small hands never left his mother's arm. That reassurance mattered, because in times of fear, even the smallest spark of hope could feel like a lifeline. The rancher's mind was already working quickly. He knew she needed more care than he could give out in the open fields. He would have to bring her back to his ranch. It wasn't far, but carrying someone who was weak would take careful strength. He rose to his feet, his large frame casting a long shadow over the family. Without hesitation, he bent down and, with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, lifted the woman into his arms. The child looked up at him, wide-eyed. The rancher nodded. "Stay close," he said simply. The woman rested her head against his chest, her breathing steady but shallow. Every step the rancher took seemed heavy with purpose, but his pace was sure. He moved with the balance of someone who had spent his life working with weight and strength. But this was different. This wasn't just carrying. It was protecting. The horse walked alongside them, guided by the child's small hand holding the reins. They moved together, an unlikely group, bound by urgency and trust. The quiet of the land surrounded them, broken only by the sound of footsteps pressing into the earth and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. As they neared the ranch, the outline of the barn and house came into view. The rancher's home was simple, built by his own hands over the years. It wasn't fancy, but it stood strong against storms and seasons, just like the man who lived there. Tonight, it would become more than just a shelter. Inside, the rancher carefully laid the woman on a sturdy bed, covering her with a quilt. He lit a lamp, the soft glow filling the room, pushing away the shadows. The child sat on the edge of the bed, refusing to let go of his mother's hand. The rancher stepped outside briefly, returning with warm water, cloths, and herbs he kept for emergencies. Though not a doctor, he knew enough about tending to injuries from years of ranch work. He cleaned her cuts with steady hands, speaking softly so she wouldn't be startled. Every action was slow, respectful, and careful. The child watched, his fear slowly melting into trust. As the night deepened, the woman's breathing grew steadier. Color began to return to her cheeks. The rancher noticed, and for the first time since the child had run to him crying, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. Later, he sat near the fire, sharpening a tool absent-mindedly. The child, still alert, looked over and asked in a quiet voice, "Will she be all right?" The rancher looked at the boy, his eyes kind but firm. "She's strong," he said, "and she's safe now. That's what matters." The boy nodded, but his gaze didn't leave his mother. The rancher respected that. He remembered his own childhood, how the smallest moments of fear could feel like the end of the world. But here, in the warmth of the ranch house, there was a new feeling growing: safety. Outside, the wind whistled softly through the trees, carrying with it the sounds of the wide land. Inside, the rancher kept watch, his tall frame sitting steady by the fire. The child eventually leaned against his mother and, worn out from the day, drifted into sleep. The rancher rose once more, checking on them both. The woman stirred lightly but did not wake. He adjusted the quilt, tucking it around her carefully, as though she were family. Then he returned to his chair, his gaze never straying far. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know why this woman and her child had ended up in such a desperate state. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that tonight, under his roof, they were safe, and though he had no idea yet, the story of this night, The moment a child's desperate cry was answered by a stranger's courage would soon ripple far beyond this quiet ranch. People he had never met would come to know of it, and the simple truth it carried, that sometimes the strength of one heart can change the fate of many. The night passed slowly on the ranch. The old wooden clock ticked steadily on the wall, and the flames in the fireplace glowed softly, filling the room with warmth. The rancher hadn't slept. He sat near the fire, keeping watch over the woman and child who had arrived so unexpectedly. Every so often, he would get up and check on them. The child slept curled beside his mother, his small hands still gripping her fingers as though letting go would mean losing her forever. The woman stirred now and then, her face still pale, but her breathing was steady, no longer shallow and weak like before. The rancher leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed. He wasn't a man used to company. His life was quiet, filled with work and routine. But looking at the two of them now, something stirred inside him, a deep sense of responsibility. He didn't know their story yet, but it didn't matter. They were under his roof now, and that meant they were under his protection. When dawn finally broke, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the windows, washing the room in soft light. The child stirred awake, blinking slowly. His eyes landed on the rancher, who was sitting in a chair nearby. For a moment, the boy looked unsure, as though remembering where he was. Then, he looked back at his mother and seemed to relax when he saw her resting peacefully. The rancher offered him a small nod. "Morning," he said in his steady, quiet voice. The child whispered, "Is Mama okay?" The rancher set down the mug of coffee he had been holding. "She's better than she was yesterday. She needs more rest, but she's safe." That one word, safe, seemed to soften the boy's tense shoulders. He sat quietly for a while, just watching his mother, before finally looking back at the rancher. "Thank you," he said, his voice still trembling but full of sincerity. The rancher simply nodded again, not used to words of gratitude. For him, doing the right thing didn't need thanks. It was just what had to be done. By mid-morning, the woman opened her eyes. She looked around the room slowly, confusion flashing across her face before her gaze fell on her son, who immediately leaned forward, whispering, "Mama, you're okay." She tried to speak, but her voice came out faint and cracked. The rancher handed her a cup of water, lifting her gently so she could drink. After a few sips, she managed to whisper, "Thank you." Her eyes met the rancher's, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. She didn't need to explain everything right away. He could see enough, the exhaustion in her face, the way her son clung to her, the relief that they had found shelter. Still, the rancher asked softly, "Do you remember what happened?" She lowered her gaze, as though gathering strength. After a pause, she whispered, We just needed help. I didn't think anyone would come." The child quickly added, "But I found him, Mama. I told him you needed help." Her lips curved into the faintest smile as she touched her son's cheek. "You were so brave," she whispered. The rancher stepped back, giving them space, but inside, he felt a weight pressing on him. Something about their situation didn't feel simple. The woman's hesitation, her guarded words, it told him there was more behind this. But he didn't press. Some stories needed time to come out. Instead, he focused on what he could do. He brought out food, warm bread, eggs, and milk from the ranch. The child ate hungrily, though he kept glancing at his mother as if afraid to enjoy too much while she still looked so tired. The woman ate slowly, her hands trembling a little, but every bite seemed to give her back a bit of strength throughout the day. The rancher returned to his chores, but his mind was never far from the two inside. He kept checking in, making sure the fire stayed warm, that water was close by, and that they had what they needed. The child, curious by nature, soon followed him outside, watching the cattle move across the fields. The rancher didn't mind. He showed him how to pour feed, how to whistle for the horse, and how to pat its neck gently. For the first time since the night before, the boy laughed, a small sound, but bright enough to fill the air with hope. The rancher looked down at him and thought about how quickly life could change. Just yesterday, this boy had run across the fields in tears, calling out for help. Today, he was smiling in the sunlight, standing a little taller. It reminded the rancher of something he had always believed, that even in the darkest moments, light could return if someone was willing to stand by. As evening approached, the woman stepped outside slowly, leaning against the doorframe. She watched her son playing with the ranch dog, her eyes softening with relief. When she looked at the rancher, her expression was filled with unspoken gratitude. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. The rancher shook his head. "Sometimes we don't choose the moment. It chooses us. You needed help. That was enough." The woman lowered her gaze, touched by the simplicity of his words. She wanted to explain more, but for now, just being safe, just watching her child smile, was enough. That night, as the stars filled the sky above the quiet ranch, the rancher sat by the window, looking out across the land. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how long this mother and child would stay. But deep down, he sensed their story wasn't finished yet, and something told him that by stepping in to help them, his own story was about to change too. The sun rose bright and clear the next morning, casting long golden beams across the ranch. The land looked peaceful, cattle grazing slowly in the distance, birds calling softly from the trees. But inside the ranch house, there was still a quiet tension. The rancher had already finished his morning chores when he returned to check on his guests. The woman was sitting up now, a little stronger than the day before. Her son was beside her, as always, holding her hand as if it were his job to keep her steady. When she saw the rancher, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. The rancher shook his head. "You don't have to. You needed help. That's what matters." The child smiled at that, as though those simple words had the power to make everything feel lighter. But the woman's face remained thoughtful. She looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy for one person alone. Later that day, when her son went outside to play with the dog, the rancher noticed her quiet gaze following the boy. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, and her lips pressed together as if she were holding back something important. The rancher sat across from her, silent at first. He wasn't one to push, but sometimes silence opened doors more than questions ever could. Finally, she spoke. Her voice trembled. "You must be wondering what happened. Why we came here." The rancher didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his expression calm, encouraging. "If you want to tell it, I'll listen." She nodded slowly, her eyes dropping to her hands. "Life hasn't been easy for us," she began. "We've had to move often, always starting over, always trying to keep going. And when things got worse," she paused, her breath catching. "I just wanted to protect my son. That's all I ever wanted. But it became too much. I couldn't keep it together anymore." Her voice cracked, and she covered her face briefly with her hands. The rancher didn't interrupt. He simply waited, giving her the space to let it out. After a moment, she lowered her hands again, her eyes wet but steady. "When I fell, when I couldn't go on, I thought that was it. I thought he would be left alone." Her gaze moved to the window, where her son's laughter drifted in from outside. "But he didn't give up. He ran until he found you." The rancher's eyes softened. "He's braver than most grown men I've met," he said. She smiled faintly at that, her tears glistening. "Yes, he saved me." For a long moment, the room was quiet. The fire crackled softly, and the air carried a stillness that felt heavy, but healing at the same time. The rancher thought about the woman's words. He didn't know all the details, and she wasn't ready to give them yet. But he knew enough to understand that this wasn't just about a moment of weakness. It was about survival, about a mother and child who had fought through struggles most people couldn't imagine. The rest of the day passed gently. The woman rested, regaining more strength, while the rancher and the boy spent time outside. The boy followed him around, curious about everything: how the rancher called the cattle, how he fixed the wooden fences, how he spoke to the horse with quiet whistles. For the first time in a long while, the boy seemed carefree, laughing openly as he tried to mimic the rancher's steps. The rancher, though not used to children, found himself smiling at the boy's determination. He even taught him how to toss feed in a straight line so the chickens wouldn't scatter. When evening came, the woman stepped outside again, leaning against the doorframe. She watched her son running across the yard, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Her eyes filled with both relief and sadness, relief that he was safe now, sadness that his young life had already been filled with so much fear. She turned to the rancher, who was coiling a rope neatly by the barn. "He hasn't smiled like this in months," she said quietly. The rancher glanced at the boy, then back at her. "Children are stronger than we think. Sometimes they just need space to breathe." Her lips curved into a small smile, though her eyes still carried that hidden weight. She knew she wasn't finished telling her story, but she also knew she had found someone who wouldn't judge her when she did. That night, after the boy fell asleep, she sat by the fire with the rancher. The glow flickered across their faces, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. She took a deep breath and said softly, "I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't even know where we'll go from here. But for the first time in a long time, I don't feel completely alone." The rancher didn't say much. He only nodded, his eyes steady and kind. Sometimes silence could be the greatest comfort of all. As the stars spread across the sky outside, the woman and child rested under the safety of the ranch roof. And though none of them could see the future, one thing had already become clear: their paths had crossed for a reason. The rancher had thought his life was simple, his days predictable. But now, he could feel it in his bones. This was just the beginning of something larger, something that would reach far beyond the quiet fences of his ranch. The days passed quietly on the ranch, but beneath the calm, the rancher felt something shifting. The woman had regained some strength, her cheeks showing color again, and the boy's laughter had become a daily sound around the house. Yet, even with the warmth of those small moments, the rancher could sense an invisible weight pressing over them, something unsaid, something waiting in the distance. He noticed how the woman sometimes paused when she heard footsteps outside or the sound of a wagon passing along the dirt road. Her eyes would flick toward the window, her hand tightening around her son's. She never explained, but her silence spoke enough. She was afraid of someone or something. One afternoon, the boy was helping the rancher fill water buckets near the well. His small hands struggled with the wooden handle, but his determination made the rancher smile. "You don't give up easy, do you?" the rancher asked. The boy grinned. "Mama says we always have to keep trying." The rancher nodded. "She's right." Their simple exchange was interrupted by the sound of hooves in the distance. The rancher straightened immediately, his sharp ears picking up the rhythm of horses coming fast. The boy froze, his smile fading as he looked nervously back at the house. The rancher rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Go to your mama," he said firmly. The boy didn't argue. He dropped the handle and ran toward the cabin, his small feet kicking up dust. The horses grew louder, closer. Soon, two riders appeared along the edge of the property. They weren't neighbors, that much the rancher could tell right away. Their posture was sharp, their movements restless. These were men searching for something, or someone. The rancher stepped forward, his tall frame steady, his voice calm but commanding. "Can I help you?" The men pulled their horses to a halt. One of them, a lean man with a hat pulled low, spoke first. "We're looking for a woman and a boy. Been missing a few days. You seen anyone pass through here?" The rancher's jaw tightened slightly, though his face gave away nothing. "Don't get much company out here," he said evenly. The other rider glanced around, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the ranch house. Strange place to live alone. Big ranch for one man. The rancher didn't move. His silence itself carried weight. The men shifted uneasily under his gaze, though they tried to hide it with smirks. Finally, the first rider spat into the dirt. "If you see them, you let us know. We'll be back to check." With that, they tugged their reins and rode off, dust rising behind them. The rancher stood still, listening until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Then he turned back toward the house. Inside, the woman was holding her son tightly, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't need to ask what had been said. She already knew. The rancher closed the door behind him, his voice low but firm. "They're looking, but you're safe here." Her hands trembled as she whispered, "You don't understand. They won't stop." The rancher looked at her steadily. "Then they'll have to go through me first." For a moment, her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't have to get involved, but something in his voice silenced her. It wasn't pride or anger speaking, it was certainty. The kind that came from a man who meant exactly what he said. That evening, The rancher made sure every door was bolted and every lantern trimmed. He walked the property slowly, checking the fences, the barns, and the stable. His ranch had always been a place of work and peace, but tonight it felt like something more, a shield. The boy followed him partway, clutching the dog by its collar. "Are they coming back?" he asked. The rancher looked down at him, his deep voice calm. "If they do, we'll be ready." The boy nodded, his eyes wide but filled with trust. For him, the rancher's words were enough to hold back the fear. Later that night, when the boy was asleep, the woman sat near the fire. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." The rancher shook his head. "Trouble comes and goes, but people matter. And your boy did the bravest thing I've seen in a long time. That deserves protecting." She lowered her gaze, touched deeply by his words. For the first time in many nights, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. But outside, beyond the fences of the ranch, the world hadn't forgotten them. The riders had left, but they would return. And when they did, the rancher knew the quiet days would be tested still. As he stood by the window that night, watching the stars, his mind was clear. He wasn't a man who went looking for battles, but when one came to his land, to the people under his roof, he wouldn't back down. The rancher's life had been simple before, but now it carried a new purpose. Protecting a child who had cried out for help, protecting a mother who had fought with all her strength to survive. And deep inside, he knew this was no accident. Some moments arrive without warning, but once they come, they define a man forever. The night air hung heavy over the ranch, carrying with it a silence that felt different from other nights. The rancher sat by the window, his eyes scanning the open fields under the moonlight. Every rustle of grass, every distant howl of a coyote sharpened his senses. He knew the riders would return. It was only a matter of time that inside the small house, the boy slept curled up under a blanket. The dog nestled beside him. The woman, though resting, stirred restlessly in her sleep, her face shadowed by worry. The rancher understood. Fear didn't leave easily. It stayed close, waiting in the corners of the mind. The hours crawled by, and then, just as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, he heard it, the unmistakable rhythm of horses on the dirt road. He rose to his feet without hesitation. The sound grew louder, clearer, until the shapes of riders appeared at the far end of the property. This time, there were more than two. The rancher stepped outside, his boots pressing into the earth. His tall frame was steady, his expression calm but unyielding. The riders slowed as they neared, their horses kicking up dust. The leader, the same man from before, tipped his hat and smirked. "Morning," the man drawled. "We told you we'd be back." The rancher said nothing at first. He let the silence stretch, heavy and firm. Then, in a voice that carried across the field, he spoke. "You won't find what you're looking for here." The men exchanged glances. Some chuckled under their breath, but the leader didn't laugh. He leaned forward on his saddle. "Funny thing," he said. "We heard different." His gaze shifted toward the house, the faint curl of smoke from the chimney. "You hiding someone in there?" The rancher's jaw tightened. His voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. "You should turn back," the leader sneered. "And if we don't?" The rancher took a step forward, his presence alone enough to quiet the laughter of the others. His eyes were steady, his tone firm. "Then you'll have to deal with me first." For a moment, the group hesitated. There was something in the rancher's stance, not just his size, but the quiet certainty in his voice. He wasn't bluffing, and they knew it. The silence stretched, broken only by the snort of a horse. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. "This ain't over," he muttered. With a sharp tug on the reins, he turned his horse. The others followed, glancing back uneasily at the rancher's towering figure. The rancher stood still until the last echo of hooves faded into the distance. Only then did he let out a slow breath. He knew they weren't gone for good. They'd return, maybe stronger, maybe angrier. But for now, the house was safe. When he stepped back inside, the boy was awake, his eyes wide. "Were they here?" he whispered. The rancher crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze. "Yes," he said simply. "But they're gone now." The boy swallowed hard. "Will they come back?" The rancher placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Maybe, But you and your mama don't need to worry about that. That's my job." The boy studied him for a moment, then nodded, his small chest rising with a shaky breath. Somehow, those words were enough. Later that morning, as the woman moved slowly round the kitchen, she caught the rancher's eye. Her voice was low, almost pleading. "Why are you doing this for us? You don't even know our story." The rancher looked at her, his expression calm. "I don't need to know your story to know what's right. You needed a place to stand, and you found mine. That's enough." Her eyes shimmered with tears. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself a fragile smile. The day passed in uneasy peace. The boy helped with small chores, eager to stay close to the rancher. The woman rested, though her eyes often strayed to the window. The rancher carried on with his work, but his mind was alert, listening for any sound out of place. That evening, as the sun dipped low, something unexpected happened. A neighbor from down the road stopped by. He had heard whispers in town about strangers asking questions, men who didn't belong. Word traveled fast in small communities, and curiosity often carried it farther than one expected. The rancher listened quietly as his neighbor spoke, then simply nodded. "Appreciate the warning." When the neighbor left, the woman looked at the rancher anxiously. "Does everyone know now?" "Not everyone," he said, "but enough to matter." He met her gaze firmly. "You're not alone in this anymore." The boy looked between them, not fully understanding, but sensing something important in the words. For the first time, the woman's eyes softened with something more than fear, trust. That night, the stars stretched endlessly across the sky. The rancher sat on the porch, the boy curled up beside him, fighting to keep his eyes open. The woman sat just inside the door, watching them both. The rancher gazed out at the land he had called home his whole life. It had always been quiet, steady, predictable. But now it carried a new weight. Protecting this family had become more than just an act of kindness. It was a calling. And though he knew the riders would come again, he felt no fear. Instead, he felt the steady strength that came from knowing his purpose. Some battles weren't chosen. They arrived at your door. And when they did, a man had to decide, turn away or stand firm. The rancher had already made his choice. The ranch was quiet again, but the stillness carried a weight that everyone could feel. Days had passed since the riders last appeared, yet the memory of their arrival lingered in the air like an echo that refused to fade. The boy still woke at night sometimes, climbing from his bed to make sure his mother was there. The woman still looked toward the horizon with a worried gaze, and the rancher, he carried the tension and silence, watching, listening, waiting. But change was already stirring, quietly at first. The boy, once fearful and fragile, began to grow steadier in his steps. Each day he followed the rancher, learning how to mend fences, carry buckets, and call the animals back from the field. Every small task gave him confidence, a reminder that he was safe and capable. The woman, too, began to find her strength again. She spent her mornings tending to small chores inside the cabin, her movements slow but more certain than before. She no longer looked as pale as when she first arrived, and when she smiled at her son, it was no longer a smile shadowed entirely by fear. The rancher noticed these changes, though he said little. He wasn't a man who measured life in words. He measured it in action, and in the quiet proof that healing was happening under his roof or still. The question of the riders remained. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in shades of amber, the woman finally asked, "What will happen if they come back?" The rancher set down the rope he had been coiling and looked at her steadily. "Then they'll see this isn't a place to cross." She lowered her gaze, torn between relief and guilt. "I never meant to bring trouble to your land." He shook his head. "This land has seen storms before. Trouble comes and goes. But people matter more than fences or cattle." The woman blinked back tears. She wanted to argue, to tell him he had already done more than enough. But in her heart, she knew there was no point. The rancher had made his choice long ago. That night, as if the land itself had heard her fears, the distant sound of hooves returned. The rancher was already on the porch before the dust rose on the horizon. This time, there were more riders, too many to ignore. The boy stood at the window, his small fists clenched, while his mother pulled him close. "Stay here," the rancher told them firmly. His voice carried no hesitation. He stepped forward into the open yard as the group of riders slowed. Their leader sneered. "Told you this wasn't over." The rancher's voice was calm, steady as stone. "You've come far enough." The men shifted in their saddles, murmuring to each other. The rancher didn't move. He was just one man, yet his presence filled the yard with a weight heavier than their numbers. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless stamping of horses. The leader tried to laugh, but it rang hollow. "You think you can stand against all of us?" The rancher's eyes didn't waver. "I don't think. I know." It wasn't just his size or strength that carried those words. It was the certainty behind them, the quiet, unshakable truth of a man who had already decided he would not back down. The riders hesitated. They had expected fear, maybe negotiation. They hadn't expected a wall of resolve that refused to bend. One by one, their eyes shifted, unease spreading like a slow fire through the group. Finally, the leader cursed under his breath. With a sharp tug on the reins, he turned his horse. "This isn't worth it," he muttered. One by one, the others followed, their bravado melting as they rode back the way they had come. The rancher stood still until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he turned and walked back to the porch. Inside, the boy's eyes shone wide, filled with awe. His mother's face was pale, but lit with relief. "They're gone?" The boy whispered. The rancher nodded. "They won't be back." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the boy ran forward, throwing his arms around the rancher's waist. The rancher stiffened, unused to such a gesture, but then his large hand rested gently on the boy's back. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she watched, not just from relief, but from the realization that in this quiet rancher, they had found more than shelter. They had found a protector, a friend, perhaps even family. News of the event soon traveled beyond the fences of the ranch. Neighbors whispered about the giant rancher who had stood alone against a group of riders to protect a woman and her child. Someone had even captured part of the moment from a distance, and before long, the story spread farther than anyone expected. In town, people spoke of courage. Beyond the town, the story traveled wider, across papers, across voices, across the quiet currents of the world. Strangers who had never met the rancher felt touched by the story of a child who cried for help, and the man who answered. But on the ranch itself, life remained simple. The woman and her son stayed for a while, helping with chores, sharing meals, and finding laughter again. The rancher never asked for thanks, and he never sought attention. To him, it had been no grand act of heroism. It was just what needed to be done. Yet, for the boy, it was everything. He would never forget the night he ran through the fields, crying for help, and he would never forget the tall figure who knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and said, "I'm here." For the mother, it was a second chance, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were still good hearts in the world, willing to stand firm. And for the rancher, though he never said it out loud, it was the day his quiet life found a new meaning, because sometimes, without warning, a cry for help can change everything.